Chapter 1 The Last Leaf. Before we begin, there have been many famous painters, sculptors, and artists around the world whose works are appreciated even after their death. Many artists make their finest pieces of work in their lifetime, called masterpieces. Are only well-known artists capable of producing masterpieces? Read the story of an unknown painter who makes his masterpiece and dies after making it. At the top of a 3-storied brick house, Sue and John C. had their studio. They had met at an 8th Street Delmonico's and found their taste in art so congenial that the joint studio resulted. In November, a cold, unseen stranger whom the doctors called pneumonia stalked about the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers, smiting his victims in hundreds. The doctor came in the afternoon. Even chances, said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaking hand in his. With good nursing, you will win. Now I must see another case downstairs. Behrman, some kind of an artist, I believe, pneumonia too. He is an old weak man and the attack is acute. There is no hope for him. The next day, the doctor said to Sue, she is out of danger. You won. Nutrition and care now, that's all. That afternoon, Sue came to the bed where John C. lay and put one arm around her. I have something to tell you, she said. Mr. Behrman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. The janitor found him in his room downstairs, helpless with pain. His shoes and clothes were wet through and icy cold. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a stormy night. Then they found a lantern still lighted and a ladder that had been dragged from its place and some scattered brushes and a palette with green and yellow colors mixed on it. And look out of the window, dear, at the last ivy leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never fluttered or moved when the wind blew? Oh, darling, it is Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell. Chapter 2 The Beauty of Music. Before we begin, have you ever got a chance to see and experience a classical music concert? Do you like listening to any piece of classical music? Classical music is a symbol of a country's or region's culture, language, and tradition. To understand and enjoy classical music, one needs to be receptive about it. Let's read how the narrator of the story develops a liking to the classical music in a brief meeting with Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, 1879 to 1955, was a German-born theoretical physicist. He received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. His work is also known for its influence on the philosophy of science. This story is about the chance meeting of the narrator with Einstein. When I was a very young man, I was invited to dine at the house of a very rich and powerful businessman. After a wonderful dinner, our hostess took us to a large drawing room. I am going to arrange the chairs for a concert, our hostess said. We are going to listen to a very good pianist. Unlike others present there, I was not happy. I did not understand classical music. I thought I was tone deaf. I sat down so that I would not be impolite and waited for the concert to begin. I did not pay attention to the music after it began. After a while, I heard everyone clapping. So I realized that the piece was over. Just then I heard a gentle but firm voice saying, "Are you fond of Bach?" I knew as much about Bach as I did about nuclear physics. I turned in order to look at my neighbor and I saw a very famous face. It was someone with a shock of white hair and a pipe. I knew that I must tell this man the truth. He looked at me as if my answer was very important. I do not know anything about Bach, I said. I have never heard any of his music. He looked surprised and asked, Have you never heard of Bach? He made it sound as if I had said that I had never taken a bath. I would like to understand music so that I could understand Bach. I said, but I am not able to. I am tone deaf. The old man got up. Will you come up with me? He asked. I just remained seated. I am requesting you to come with me, he said again. So I went up with him. He took me to a room which had a gramophone in it and asked, what kind of music do you like? Well, I answered, I like songs which have words and the kind of music where I can follow the tune. He smiled and nodded, obviously pleased. Can you give me an example, please? I told him I liked anything by Bing Crosby. At once, I could hear Bing Crosby's voice filling the room. Now can you please tell me what you just heard? He said. The simplest answer seemed to be to sing the lines. So I sang it back to him. He smiled. You are not tone deaf, he said. I told him this was one of my favorite songs, which I had heard hundreds of times. So it did not really prove anything. Einstein said, it proves everything. Do you remember your first arithmetic lesson in school? Suppose at your very first contact with numbers, your teacher had ordered you to work out a problem in, say, long division or fractions. Could you have done it? No, of course not. Exactly. Music is like learning maths. You have to learn addition and subtraction in order to do multiplication and division. Now I am playing something a little more advanced. It was The Trumpeter by John McCormack. Sing that back, he ordered. And we went on from one level to a higher level until he was playing just music without words. I was amazed that this great man was paying complete attention to me so that I could learn something new. It was as if I was the most important person in his world. Suddenly, he got up and turned off the gramophone. Now, young man, he said, we are ready to listen to Bach. We went down and sat in the hall. Just allow yourself to listen, he advised. I have heard that piece many times since that day, but I am never alone. I am sitting beside a small man with a shock of untidy hair and a pipe in his mouth. When the concert ended, I too was able to clap sincerely. Our hostess came towards us. We both stood up. I am so sorry, Dr. Einstein, she said, giving me a cold look, that you missed so much. I am sorry too, he said. My young friend here and I, however, were engaged in the greatest activity of which a human being is capable. She looked puzzled. Really? She said, and what is that? Einstein smiled and put his arm across my shoulders, opening up the frontiers of beauty.
Poem 1. Invictus. Before we begin, this poem is focused on the human spirit and its ability to overcome odds. It is a rallying cry for those who find themselves in dark and trying situations, or who have to dig deep or fight for their lives. Let's read the poem and explore it. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
Chapter 3. The Girls Who Taught Their Village. Before we begin, people who belong to the section of lower income do not show much interest in sending their children to school. It happens because these people are more interested in sending their children to do petty jobs in order to earn some money and thus add to the family income. The Government of India provides free education to all children up to the age of 14. But this model scheme alone cannot bring a change in India's literacy rate. What steps should be taken to educate poor children? Tabassum, Tarannum and Rubina have changed the face of the little village of Sajoy near Varanasi for good. There was a time when no child in the village took education seriously. Girls would drop out of school to help their mothers, and the people of the village refused to see the importance of a good education. In our village, nobody studied. We, the three of us, were the only ones who finished school and went on to study further. Some of the children had never even stepped out of the village. The children from the basti start working at a young age and ignore their education, says Tabassum. The girls decided to take matters into their own hands. They started going door to door to ask students to go to school. They got in touch with the Human Welfare Association, an NGO in Varanasi, which trained them to take on this challenge and provided them with every possible support. The girls found a small public place where they started a school. The school was meant for children who had never stepped out of their home or had dropped out of school because of any problem. It was very difficult in the beginning. Students would just not show up. But we knew if we gave up easily, our mission would remain incomplete. We would go to their houses every day and ask them to come to our school. And finally, after 6 months of doing this, students started coming to school without us having to drag them from their homes, Tabassum recalls. In the first month, they had 35 students, but after a year, they managed to enroll over 170 students in the school. However, the battle was only half won as far as they were concerned. The biggest challenge was to bring in the girls who had left school altogether. Their parents did not want these girls to leave their homes. They thought going to school was a waste of time for them, as they could do household work during the day, she says. But the trio were not ready to let go of their dream of educating the girls in their village. They started a small tailoring training center at the school so that the families would let their daughters come there. When the girls came to learn tailoring, we started teaching them as well. Many parents got angry and asked us why we were teaching them when they had been sent to learn tailoring. We would tell them that tailoring requires some measurements and calculations, and a basic education is necessary for that, Tabassum says. Their efforts led to the transformation of the village. When they first started their school in 2007, only 2 or 3 people in the village were educated. Now 90% of the children, including girls, go to school. The greatest triumph for the girls came when not just the children but their mothers too began to show an interest in education. There are several women in the village now who no longer use their thumb impressions as signatures. They can now sign their own names. But all this was not easy. We faced many challenges. The people of the village would shout at us and say that we were a bad influence on their girls. It was humiliating. We would go home and cry. But it was our parents' support that kept us going. Without them, we wouldn't have achieved anything, says Tabassum. There was even a time when the people of the village asked them to leave the public space where they ran their school. So they started teaching from their own homes. It used to hurt us when people said that we wouldn't be able to do anything just because we were girls. But we have proved everyone wrong, she says. Today, the people who used to mock them are coming forward to support them as they see a positive change in the village. The people of the village even came forward and arranged for electricity so that the fans and lights would work in the school. We can't give the children certificates, So we give them a good education and help them connect to good schools, said Tabassum. The trio has managed to work successfully with over 150 children so far, and they continue to get more admissions every year. Along with teaching, the girls are now completing their college education. They are studying information technology. We would just like to say this to everyone: please let your daughters and sons study and do whatever you can for your village people as they need you, concludes Tabassum. Chapter 4: My Longing for Education. Before we begin, the slaves working tirelessly in southern states of the USA were set free by the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863. It brought about a new dawn in the lives of scores of African Americans. Earlier, it was illegal for slaves to read and write. After they got freedom, they were all anxious to become literate. Following is an extract from the autobiography of one of the most famous African American leaders of the USA, Booker T. Washington, on his struggle to get education. From the time that I can remember having any thoughts about anything, I recall that I had an intense longing to learn to read. Soon after we got settled in some manner in our new cabin in West Virginia, I persuaded my mother to get hold of a book for me. She somehow procured an old copy of Webster's Blue Back Spelling Book, which contained the alphabet. I began at once to devour this book, and I think that it was the first one I ever had in my hands. I tried in all the ways I could think of to learn the alphabet, all of course without a teacher, for I could find no one to teach me. There was not a single member of my race anywhere near us who could read, and I was too timid to approach any of the white people. Within a few weeks, I mastered the greatest portion of the alphabet. In all my efforts to learn to read, my mother fully shared my ambition and sympathized with me and helped me in every way that she could. Though she was not formally educated herself, she had high ambitions for her children and a large fund of good, hard common sense. In the mindset of my struggles and longing for an education, a young colored boy who had learned to read in the state of Ohio came to Malden. As soon as the colored people found out that he could read, a newspaper was bought, and at the close of nearly every day's work, this young man would be surrounded by a group of men and women who were anxious to hear him read the news contained in the papers. About this time, the idea of opening some kind of a school for the colored children in the village began to be discussed by the people. Since it would be the first school for the colored children that had ever been opened in that part of Virginia, it was, of course, to be a great and wildly exciting event. As yet, no free schools had been started for colored people. Hence, each family agreed to pay a certain amount per month, with the understanding that the teacher who was appointed was to board round, that is, spend a day with each family. This was not bad for the teacher, for each family tried to provide the very best on the day the teacher was to be its guest. I recall that I looked forward very anxiously to the Teacher's Day at our little cabin. All across the country, it was a whole race trying to go to school. No one was too old to make the attempt to learn, and almost no one was too young. As fast as any kind of teachers could be found, not only were day schools filled, but night schools as well. The great ambition of the older people was to try to learn to read the Bible before they died. With this end in view, the men and the women who were 50 or 75 years old would often be found in the night school. Some day schools were formed soon after freedom, but the principal book studied in the Sunday school was the spelling book. Day school, night school, and Sunday school were always crowded, and often many had to be turned away for want of room. The opening of the school in the Kanavaha Valley, however, brought to me one of the sharpest disappointments that I ever experienced. I had been working in a salt furnace for several months, and my stepfather had discovered that I had a financial value for the family. And so, when the school opened, he decided that he could not spare me from my work. I was bitterly disappointed. The disappointment was made even more severe because I could see from my place of work the happy children passing to and from school. My mother tried to comfort me in all the ways she could and to help me find a way to learn. After a while, I managed to arrange some lessons at night with the teacher after the day's work was done. These night lessons were so welcome that I think I learned more at night than the other children did during the day. But my boyish heart was still set upon going to the day school. Finally, I won and was permitted to go to the school in the day for a few months. The understanding was that I must rise early in the morning and work in the furnace till 9 o'clock and return immediately after the school closed in the afternoon for at least 2 more hours of work. The schoolhouse was some distance from the furnace where I now worked, and as I had to work till 9 o'clock and the school opened at 9, I found myself in a difficulty. School would always begin before I reached it, and sometimes my class had recited. To get around this difficulty, I did something wrong. I am sure that most people will condemn me for what I did, but since it is a fact, I might as well state it. There was a large clock in a little office in the furnace. This clock, of course, all the 100 or more people depended upon to begin and end the day's work. I got the idea that the way for me to reach school on time was to move the clock hands from 8:30 up to the 9 o'clock mark. This I found myself doing morning after morning till the furnace boss discovered that something was wrong and locked the clock in a case. I did not mean to bring inconvenience to anybody. I simply meant to reach that schoolhouse in time. When, however, I found myself at the school for the first time, I found myself faced with other difficulties. In the first place, I found that all the other children wore hats or caps on their heads, and I had neither hat nor cap. In fact, I do not remember that up to the time of going to school, I had ever worn any kind of covering upon my head. But of course, when I saw how all the other boys were dressed, I began to feel quite uncomfortable. As usual, I put the case before my mother, and she explained to me that she had no money with which to buy a store hat, a rather new fashion at that time among the members of my race. But she said she would find a way to help me out of the difficulty. And so she did. She somehow got 2 pieces of homespun and sewed them together. And I was soon the proud possessor of my first cap. The lesson that my mother taught me in this has always remained with me, and I have tried as best as I could to teach it to others. I have always felt proud whenever I think of the incident that my mother had such strength of character. She did not try to impress my schoolmates and others with the fact that she was able to buy me a store hat when she could not. Since that time, I have owned many kinds of caps and hats, but never one of which I have felt so proud. My first cap made of the 2 pieces of clothes sewn together by my mother.
Poem 2. My Native Land. Before we begin, some people move out of their home country or state in search of better education, earnings, and surroundings. Settling in the foreign lands, they miss the carefree life of their native places. No amount of fame and money can ever disconnect them from the places of their origin. Do you think there are some people who are not proud of their native place and do not wish to go back to it ever? Breathes there the man with soul so dead, who never to himself hath said, "This is my own, my native land," whose heart hath ne'er within him burned. As home his footsteps he hath turned, from wandering on a foreign strand. If such there breathe, go, mark him well. From him no minstrel raptures swell. High though his titles, proud his name, boundless his wealth as wish can claim. Despite those titles, power and pelf, the wretch concentrate all in self. Living shall forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung, unwept, unhonored, and unsung.
Chapter 5. Never Give Up. Before we begin, hard work, dedication, determination, and perseverance are the 4 pillars of success. If you have an aim to achieve and a dream to realize, you should never let any hurdle come in your way. In the field of professional sports, there have been many examples of sportspersons who have overcome all kinds of problems and hurdles in life and achieved tremendous success. The story of Kipchoge Keino is perhaps the most inspiring story of a man who came with a humble background, but with his hard work and never say die attitude, he fulfilled his dream. One of Kenya's greatest Olympic athletes, winning the gold medal twice, Kipchoge Keino is also one of the world's most admired sportspersons. Kip, the first in a long line of successful middle and long distance runners from his country, has helped and inspired many of his fellow countrymen and women to become the defending athletes that they are today. There was a time when Kip was almost late for his own race and had to literally run to get there, then won a gold medal anyway, despite suffering from a gallbladder infection. Kip's grit and determination in winning a gold and silver medal in the 1968 Olympics endeared him to sports lovers around the world. That drive and single-minded determination to succeed against all odds has today made him one of the great benefactors to underprivileged children in Kenya. Keino is best known for his training at 1800 meters above sea level, which helped introduce high-altitude training as a technique to improve running time. A member of the Nandi tribe, he was born in Kipsano, Kenya. He came from humble beginnings and his name, Kipchoge, is a Nandi expression that means born near the grain storage shed. As both of his parents died when he was very young, Kip was raised by his aunt. When once asked about his childhood and how he started running, Kip responded, "When I started at primary school, I ran in my bare feet 4 miles, 6.5 kilometers to school in the morning. Then I ran home for lunch, again for afternoon school and back at the end of the day. I did this every day until I left school." After finishing school, Kip worked as a physical training instructor for the Kenyan police force before becoming an athlete. Keino began his international running career in 1962 when he set a Kenyan record in the mile running event. At the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo, Keino represented his country in their first games as an independent nation, finishing 5th in the 5,000 meters race. Later in 1964, he set 2 world records in 3,000 meters with a time of 7 minutes 39.6 seconds and in 5,000 meters with a time of 13 minutes 24.2 seconds. His greatest feat came 2 years later during the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City. Unfortunately, for the entire duration of the Games, Kip was suffering from an acute gallbladder infection. Kip had almost collapsed while running the 10,000 meters, This was especially cruel when you realize that Kip was in the lead when he was overwhelmed by the pain and he had only 3 laps to go. By stepping off of the track after he collapsed, he had automatically disqualified himself. Determined to finish the race anyway, he stumbled back onto the track and despite the pain, managed to do the final laps, even though it did not count. The eventual winner of that race was one Naftali Temu, another Kenyan who now holds the honor of being Kenya's first gold medal winner. Prior to running the 10,000 meters, Kip had been told by a doctor not to run and that any strain to his body might cause him serious harm and in the extreme case could even lead to his death. But that did not stop him from participating. 2 days after the 10,000 meters, the race he collapsed in, Kip ran in the 5,000 meters and won a silver medal, finishing just 1/5 of a second behind the gold medalist. On top of that, he then ran another 1500 meters race and qualified for the final of the event. On the day of the 1500 meters final, Kip, because of his ailment, wound up oversleeping. When his absence was noted, people thought that he had chosen not to race on medical grounds. Nevertheless, only an hour before the actual event, he hopped out of bed and headed off to the games. On the route to the Olympic Stadium, the bus was stuck in traffic. Realizing that he was going to be late, Kip got off and ran the remaining 2 miles to the Olympic Stadium while carrying his equipment. Registering himself with 20 minutes to spare, got himself ready and walked out onto the track and won a gold medal, outpacing the second place runner by an astounding 20 meters, the longest distance anyone had ever won by in the event at that time. Not only this, the man he beat by such a huge margin, Jim Ryun, had not been defeated in the 1500 meters in 3 years. Also, Kip had now raced 5 times in that Olympics while Ryun was completely fresh. On top of all that, Kip was unwell too. In the end, Kip finished with an Olympic record time of 3 minutes 34.9 seconds, the second fastest in history at that point. At the 1972 Olympics in Munich, West Germany, he won his second Olympics gold medal in the 3000 meters steeplechase and also won a silver medal in the 1500 meters. Kenyon Hiro Kinu retired from the track in 1973, but there was much still to come from this remarkable man. Kip and his wife Phillips purchased a farm in Eldoret, which they converted into an orphanage, the Kip Kino Children's Home. We started with 2 children, then it went to 6, then 10. Now it's up to 90. We give them shelter and love. Many of these children who lived with us as orphans have gone to university, some are doctors, and when you see them with their own families living well in society, I feel very happy, he says. The Kino family realized a lifelong dream in 2000 with the creation of the Kip Kino School funded by various donations. Almost 300 children attend the school. Chapter 6. Rafting in the Ganges. Before we begin, adventure sports are an extreme form of sporting activities that involves a high degree of risk. These activities involve speed, height, physical exercise, and specialized equipment and gear. Motorcycle racing, river rafting, windsurfing, water skiing, parasailing, etc. are some examples of adventure sports. Read the chapter to find out how the narrator and his friends perform an adventure sport and how they react to it. The narrator and his friends Shekhar and Nikhil meet up and decide to go river rafting in the rapids at Rishikesh. Shekhar and Nikhil were spending a few days in Devprayag. I was in the Garhwal region for some work, so 3 of us decided to meet up at Rishikesh. We checked into a tented rafting camp. Located on a beach by the Ganges, it is the perfect place to relax and an ideal spot for river rafting as well. Shekhar and I were very excited about the idea of rafting, but Nikhil was petrified as he did not know swimming. I am sure he was deeply regretting his declaration over dinner on the first evening at camp. In a show of momentary bravado, he had announced that river rafting was a piece of cake and that he would conquer the rapids easily. The next morning, he found himself on a bright blue raft with a paddle in hand, listening to the river guide Rizwan shout out commands like easy forward, right back and get down. Nikhil froze in fear as the raft sped fast towards the wall. The wall is the scariest amongst the other rapids on the Ganges between Devprayag to Rishikesh. The rapid is both revered and feared because there is no fixed procedure or path through the wall. Its strength and the pattern of the currents change every day, sometimes several times during the day. The wall got its name from the fact that going past it is like trying to go through a wall of water. Rafters have to be extremely careful while navigating the wall. 5 times out of 10, rafts flip while attempting this rapid. As our raft neared the wall, Nikhil started praying, hoping that it would save him from this icy, frothing mess that he had allowed himself to be foolishly led into. By then, the noise created by the rapid was so loud that Rizwan had to call out his commands at the top of his voice. Nikhil's panic increased as he realized that this little rubber raft may not be able to handle the dangerous wall. Shekhar and I were the first row of paddlers, he on the right and I on the left. Nikhil was the part of the second row and was sitting right behind me. I glanced back and saw his eyes widen with anxiety. I looked ahead. The wall emerged large. The waves were over 7 foot high, and the huge holes were being created as the river leaped high in the air and then crashed back down. Nikhil tightened the grip on his paddle to prepare himself for battle as the raft was suddenly pulled towards the rapid. We tackled the first wave successfully, but everything went awry at the second wave. The huge wave came charging in diagonally and flicked the raft over as casually as you would flick a bug off your forearm. Nikhil's eyes went even wider as he saw me 3 feet in the air above him. He tried to grab the guy lines of the raft, but he couldn't find them, and a moment later went face first into the cold green waters of the Ganges. In the first moment of hitting water, Nikhil must have swallowed enough water to fill a bathtub. As I went up to the surface, I tried looking for him. The raft was upside down and Shekhar emerged from under it. I was still in the rapid and the waves were breaking over me, but thankfully all of us were on the other side of the wall. In the safety briefing, Rizwan had reassured us that the life jacket would prevent any paddler from drowning. And as if keeping that thought in mind, Nikhil broke the surface of the water, frantically waving his arms and taking in deep gulps of air. Villagers on the cliffs by the river mistook his panic-stricken gestures for signs of friendliness and waved back enthusiastically. To this, Nikhil replied with some choice phrases which I pretended not to hear. Finally, he calmed down and went into the white water position. Relieved that he was fine, I looked around me. The raft was still upside down and Rizwan was trying to turn it the right way up. The 2 safety kayakers were making sure that all of us were safe. The 2 rafts which were behind us took on the wall as well. One made it and the other was flipped over. Soon there were 2 rafts floating upside down in the water and 12 of us floating downstream. The safety kayakers got everyone into their respective rafts. Back in the safety of the raft, Nikhil realized a series of loud belches letting out the air that he had swallowed along with water. The belches echoed up and down the river valley like the cries of a lonely leopard. After 20 minutes and 2 more rapids, which now seemed like the mild ripples of a calm sea, we pulled up in front of our camp. Nikhil looked disturbed, but as we sat by the river, sipping the hot tea that the staff had kept ready for us, his mind had already started giving heroic shape to the wall episode. For months after that, he milked the incident for all it's worth. The last time I heard him recount it, the incident featured his being chased by crocodiles that had attacked the raft and flipped it over.
9 gold medals. Before we begin, the Olympic Games are held once every 4 years. Athletes from all over the world train hard to participate in these sporting events. Winning a medal in the Olympics is the ultimate goal of every athlete of the world. Have you ever heard of the term Special Olympics? In Special Olympics, all kinds of differently abled persons participate in various sports events. The sports events for Special Olympics have been designed in such a way that these special athletes do not find much difficulty in performing them. The athletes had come from all over the country to run for the gold, for the silver and bronze. Many weeks and months of training, all coming down to these games. The spectators gathered around the old field to cheer on all the young women and men. The final event of the day was approaching. Excitement grew high to begin. The blocks were all lined up for those who would use them. The 100-yard dash and the race to be run. These were 9 resolved athletes in back of the starting line, poised for the sound of the gun. The signal was given. The pistol exploded. The 8 other runners pulled up on their heels, the ones who had trained for so long to compete. One by one they all turned around and went back to help him and brought the young boy to his feet. Then all the 9 runners joined hands and continued. The 100-yard dash now reduced to a walk, and a banner above that said Special Olympics could not have been more on the mark. That's how the race ended, with 9 gold medals. They came to the finish line holding hands still, and a standing ovation and 9 beaming faces said more than these words ever will.
Chapter 7. The Stolen Bacillus. Before we begin, what kind of pictures emerge in your mind when you think of war? Since ancient times, wars have been fought using a variety of weapons. In the modern world, weapons of mass destruction are possessed by all the countries. A biological war is relatively a new concept by which a large area, along with the people living on it, can be completely destroyed by using deadly microbes. Such a war can be possible in the near future, and its consequences can be horrible. This again, said the bacteriologist, slipping a glass slide under the microscope, is a preparation of the celebrated Bacillus of cholera, the cholera germ. The pale-faced man peered down the microscope. He was evidently not used to that kind of thing and held a limp white hand over his free eye. "I see very little," he said. "Touch this screw," said the bacteriologist. "Perhaps the microscope is out of focus for you. Just the fraction of a turn this way or that." "Ah, now I see," said the visitor. "Not so very much to see after all. Little streaks and shreds of pink, and yet those little particles, those mere atomies, might multiply and devastate a city. Wonderful." He stood up and, releasing the glass slip from the microscope, held it in his hand towards the window. "Scarcely visible," he said, looking carefully at the preparation. He hesitated. "Are these alive?" Are they dangerous now? Those have been stained and killed, said the bacteriologist. I wish for my own part we could kill and stain every one of them in the universe. I suppose, the pale man said with a slight smile. You scarcely care to have such things about you in the living in the active state? On the contrary, we are obliged to, said the bacteriologist. Here, for instance, he walked across the room and took up one of several sealed tubes. Here is the living thing. This is a cultivation of the actual living disease bacteria. He hesitated. Bottled cholera, so to speak. A slight sign of satisfaction appeared momentarily on the face of the pale man. The bacteriologist held the tube in his hand thoughtfully. Yes, here is the offending bacterium imprisoned. Only break such a little tube as this into a supply of drinking water, say to these minute particles of life, go forth, increase and multiply. And death, mysterious, untraceable death, death swift and terrible, death full of pain and shame, would be released upon this city. The pale-faced man nodded. He cleared his throat. These anarchists, rascals, said he, are fools, blind fools, to use bombs when this kind of thing is available, I think. At the moment, a gentle rap, a mere light touch of the fingernails was heard at the door. The bacteriologist opened it. Just a minute, dear, whispered his wife. When he re-entered the laboratory, his visitor was looking at his watch. I had no idea I had wasted an hour of your time, he said. 12 minutes to 4. I ought to have left here by 3:30. But your things were really too interesting. No, positively, I cannot stop a moment longer. I have an engagement at 4. He passed out of the room, repeating his thanks, and the bacteriologist accompanied him to the door, and then returned thoughtfully along the passage to his laboratory. How he gloated on those cultivations of disease germs! A disturbing thought struck him. He turned to the bench by the vapor bath and then very quickly to his writing table. Then he felt hastily in his pockets and then rushed to the door. I may have put it down on the hall table, he said. Minnie, he shouted harshly in the hall. Yes, dear, came a distant voice. Had I anything in my hand when I spoke to you, dear, just now? Pause. Nothing, dear, because I remember. Blue ruin, cried the bacteriologist, and immediately ran to the front door and down the steps of his house to the street. Minnie, hearing the door slam violently, ran in alarm to the window. Down the street, a slender man was getting into a cab. The bacteriologist, hatless and in his carpet slippers, was running and gesticulating wildly towards this group. One slipper came off, but he did not wait for it. He has gone mad, said Minnie. It's that horrible science of his. The slender man pointed hastily to the bacteriologist, said something to the cabman. The apron of the cab slammed. The whip swished. The horse's feet clattered, and in a moment the cab, with the bacteriologist hotly in pursuit, had receded up the vista of the roadway and disappeared round the corner. Minnie hastily put her bonnet on, seized his shoes, went into the hall, took down his hat and light overcoat, emerged upon the doorstep, and hailed a cab that luckily crawled by. Drive me up the road and round Havelock Crescent, and see if we can find a gentleman running about in a velveteen coat and no hat. The man in the foremost cab sat crouched in the corner, his arms tightly folded, and the little tube that contained such vast possibilities of destruction gripped in his hand. He had only to break the little tube into a reservoir. How brilliantly he had planned it, forged the letter of introduction and got into the laboratory, and how brilliantly he had seized his opportunity. He craned out of the cab. The bacteriologist was hardly 50 yards behind. He would be caught and stopped yet. The cab swayed, and the anarchist, half standing under the trap, put the hand containing the little glass tube upon the apron to preserve his balance. He felt the brittle thing crack, and the broken half of it rang upon the floor of the cab. He fell back into the seat with a curse and stared dismally at the 2 or 3 drops of moisture on the apron. He shuddered. Well, I suppose I shall be the first. A little drop was still in the broken end of the tube, and he drank that to make sure. It was better to make sure. Then it dawned upon him that there was no further need to escape the bacteriologist. In Wellington Street, he told the cabman to stop and got out. He stood on the pavement with his arms folded upon his breast, awaiting the arrival of the bacteriologist. Why, one, anarchy. You are too late, my friend. I have drunk it. The cholera is abroad. The bacteriologist from his cab beamed curiously at him through his spectacles. You have drunk it, an anarchist, I see now. He was about to say something more and then checked himself. A smile hung in the corner of his mouth, as if to dissent, at which the anarchist waved him a dramatic farewell and strode off towards Waterloo Bridge, carefully jostling his infected body against as many people as possible. The bacteriologist was so preoccupied with the vision of him that he scarcely showed the slightest surprise at the appearance of Minnie upon the pavement with his hat and shoes and overcoat. Very good of you to bring my things, he said, and remained lost in contemplation of the receding figure of the You had better get in, he said, still staring. Put on my shoes. Certainly, dear, said he. You see, that man came to my house to see me and he is an anarchist. No, don't faint or I cannot possibly tell you the rest. And I wanted to astonish him, not knowing he was an anarchist, and took up a cultivation of that new species of bacterium I was telling you of, that infest and I think caused the blue patches upon various monkeys, and like a fool, I said it was Asiatic cholera, and he ran away with it to poison the water of London. And he certainly might have made things look blue for this civilized city. And now he has swallowed it. Of course, I cannot say what will happen, but you know, it turned that kitten blue, and the 3 puppies in patches, and the sparrow bright blue. But the bother is, I shall have all the trouble and expense of preparing some more.
Chapter 8. The Unexpected Visitor. Before we begin, from the very inception, when the man set his foot on the moon first,
there have been many space visits by astronauts
of the world. Spaceship carries astronauts out of the Earth's atmosphere so that they may conduct various experiments, carry out researches, and collect samples from various celestial bodies. Living in space is a difficult task for astronauts, as they have to survive and do their work in a completely different atmosphere. Let's read the story about a group of astronauts who encounter a visitor in their spaceship. After working smoothly for such a long time, the engines and navigation systems of spaceship ESV Einstein have suddenly failed. Lights come up on the bridge of a spacecraft. Captain William and 2 members of his crew, Simon and Larry. William is speaking into a communication device. William says, "This is Captain William of the ESV Einstein. We only have a few hours of life support left. Our engines and our navigation systems have failed. Our situation is desperate. We have no idea where we have reached. If you copy it, please respond." He turns off the device. Simon says, "Doesn't look good, does it?" William says, "Never looks good. Life is hard and it's over too soon." Larry says, "Hey, you know what day this is?" William says, "It's the day we are all going to die." Larry says, "No, I mean back on Earth. It's Christmas Day, Captain." William says, "Well, at least I don't have to worry about someone giving me a fruit cake." There comes the sound of a tremendous pounding, as though something was hammering on the outside of the ship. Simon says, "What the?" Larry says, "We're in the middle of space. There can't be anything out there. William says, could be a rescue ship. Open the airlock now. Larry turns some dials on a control panel. Larry says, outer lock open. Outer lock closed. Injecting atmosphere. Interior lock opening. Enters Santa Claus with a huge bag of gifts. Santa says, ho ho ho! Merry Christmas! I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner, but Christmas is a busy day for me. Larry Alba, I have something for you I know you'd like. A shiny new quantifree Bostat. It's just what you need to repair your engines. Santa takes a strange looking gizmo out of his sack. Larry says, Captain, he's right. This will fix the engines. Larry runs off to fix the engines. Santa says, Noah Simon, I haven't forgotten you. Here's the Vaxotran you need to fix your navigation equipment. Santa takes another strange device out of his sack and gives it to Simon. Simon says, I don't believe this. This is exactly what we need to find our way home. I'll go install it right now. Simon exits. William says, Who are you? Santa says, Don't you recognize me, Captain? I'm Santa Claus. William says, No, I mean, who are you really? Santa says, You'd really like to know, wouldn't you? It would make you happy to know. William says, I don't know about happy. You're an alien, aren't you? Santa says, Let's just say I live to make people happy. William says, Let's just say you're lying through your teeth. Santa says, No, I'm telling the truth. I'm a symbiont. I'm made of energy and I travel through the universe spreading happiness. I feed on the feelings of joy I create. That happy energy is what keeps me alive. William says, I've been from one end of the galaxy to the other, and I've never seen anything as nice as you claim to be. Life is hard, and the only way to survive is to be always ready for the worst. Santa says, Captain, what gift can I give you to make you happy? William says, Why don't you give me a cryzo gun? Santa reaches into his bag of gifts and takes out a cryzo gun which he gives to the captain. Santa says, Merry Christmas, Captain! The captain points the gun at Santa. William says, Now, perhaps you wouldn't mind telling me how you knew exactly what was wrong with our equipment? Could it be that you caused the malfunctions in the first place? Santa turns sinister. Santa says, Captain, you asked for a cryzo gun. You didn't ask for the ammunition you need to operate it. William says, That's all right. I already have the ammunition. Carter slaps an ammo clip onto his cryzo gun. Santa digs into his sack for another ray gun, but before Santa can fire, Carter shoots. Santa falls dead. A moment later, Simon and Larry enter. Simon says, Captain! Larry says, What happened? William says, I didn't trust this fellow. I'm not sure exactly what he was up to, but it's over now. I think this calls for a celebration. Captain William exits. As soon as he's gone, Santa sits up. He is fine. Santa says, Don't be sad. I'm perfectly fine. Larry says, Santa! Simon says, What happened? Santa says, I gave the captain what he wanted most in the world. Validation of his view of life. It's not what most people would choose for a Christmas present, but it's what he wanted. You will keep my survival our little secret, won't you? I wouldn't want to spoil his Christmas. Santa starts to exit. Larry says, Where are you going, Santa? Santa says, back to the airlock. There are a lot of people in the universe for me to make happy. Simon says, you really are Santa Claus, aren't you? Santa says, Merry Christmas, Noah Simon. Santa exits. The secret of the machines. Before we begin, machines are something that make our work easy and reduce our energy spent on the same work. We have been using simple to complex machines from the very beginning of our civilization. As we advance, the machines are getting more sophisticated and complex. We should use these machines wisely and carefully because carelessness in handling them may cause serious injury. We were taken from the ore bed and the mine. We were melted in the furnace and the pit. We were cast and wrought and hammered to design. We were cut and filled and tooled and gauged to fit. Some water, coal and oil is all we ask, and 1/1000th of an inch to give us play. And now, if you will, set us to our task, we will serve you 4 and 20 hours a day. We can pull and haul and push and lift and drive. We can print and plow and weave and heat and light. We can run and race and swim and fly and dive. We can see and hear and count and read and write. Would you call a friend from half across the world if you let us have his name and town and state? You shall see and hear your crackling question hurled across the arch of heaven while you wait. Has he answered? Does he need you at his side? You can start this very evening if you choose and take the Western Ocean in the stride of 70,000 horses and some screws. The boat express is waiting your command. You will find the Mauretania at the quay till her captain turns the lever 'neath his hand and the monstrous 9-decked city goes to sea. Do you wish to make the mountains bare their head and lay their new cut forest at your feet? Do you want to turn a river in its bed or plant a barren wilderness with wheat? Shall we pipe aloft and bring you water down from the never-failing cisterns of the snows to work the mills and tramways in your town and irrigate your orchards as it flows? It is easy, give us dynamite and drills. Watch the iron-shouldered rocks lie down and quake as the thirsty desert level floods and fills and the valley we have dammed becomes a lake. But remember, please, the law by which we live. We are not built to comprehend a lie. We can neither love nor pity nor forgive. If you make a slip in handling us, you die. We are greater than the peoples or the kings. Be humble as you crawl beneath our rods. Our touch can alter all created things. We are everything on earth except the gods. Though our smoke may hide the heavens from your eyes, it will vanish and the stars will shine again. Because for all our power and weight and size, we are nothing more than children of your brain. Chapter 9. Northeast India. Before we begin, one of the most beautiful and fascinating places in India, the Northeast India, consists of the 7 states: Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Tripura, collectively called the 7 Sisters. The major portion of this region of India consists of mountains, hills, and evergreen rainforests. People living here have a simple lifestyle and are nature-friendly. 3 of the 7 states have been described in this chapter. Mizoram, nestled in the mountains of northeast India, is the tiny state of Mizoram. Its scenic hills and mountains, serene lakes, deep valleys, and rippling streams tumbling down the cliffs to form spectacular waterfalls, are a naturalist's delight. Its forests and thick bamboo groves are home to a variety of wildlife, especially the birds. The local people of Mizoram are called Mizos. Warm, generous, and welcoming, the Mizos follow a code of good values called Twamgaina. Life in Mizoram continues to be based on traditional community life. A highlight of this lifestyle is the community dances held during the harvest festivals. In Mizoram, the term Koot means festival, and most of the festivals are related to agriculture. Chapchur Kut is a festival that is celebrated during the period when the bamboos and trees in the forest are cut and burnt. This is done to clear the land for jhuming or shifting agriculture. The people of Mizoram also have many unique dances and songs. One of the oldest dances of Mizoram is the Chero, which is hundreds of years old. This dance is performed with bamboo poles. The performers sit face to face on the ground and tap long pairs of bamboo poles open and close in time with rhythmic beats. Young women dressed in traditional clothes dance in and out between the bamboo. The Mizos also have a rich heritage of arts and crafts. The Paikwang, a bamboo basket often used to carry cotton or firewood, is a unique example of the artistic skills of the Mizo people. Assam. Assam is a land of blue hills, lush green plains, and many rivers such as Brahmaputra and Barak. It is also a state with a rich and diverse culture, as people of different faiths and races have been living here together with peace and harmony for thousands of years. The Shivalik Hills lie along the northern and western edges of Assam. Numerous snow-fed rivers and streams flow down the slopes of the Shivaliks and feed the emerald green paddy fields and tea estates the state is best known for. There are many festivals that are unique to this region. Bihu is the most important festival of Assam. It can be broadly divided into three categories. Bohag Bihu, which celebrates the hope for a good harvest because this is the time when farmers start sowing. Kati Bihu, which marks the cutting and binding of crops, and Magh Bihu, which marks the season of harvesting. The Assamese are also known for their excellent craftsmanship. Cane and bamboo play an important role in life in Assam. Grown in abundance, cane and bamboo are used to make most of the household articles in Assamese homes, such as baskets to the making of musical instruments, and even the construction of homes. The Assamese people are also known for making beautiful, colorful masks. These masks are made with terracotta, metal, bamboo, and wood, and were traditionally used in folk theatres. Today, they are also sold to tourists as a source of income. Nagaland. Nagaland is a largely mountainous state, which is famous for its tropical, subtropical, and subtropical evergreen forests. 20% of the land of the state is covered with wooded forests, and there is plentiful flora and fauna found here. These forests are also home to the great Indian hornbills. The people of Nagaland belong to 16 different tribes, each with a language that is exclusive to the tribe. The languages are very distinct and unique to such an extent that communication between tribes can sometimes be difficult. Today, however, English is also commonly spoken across the state. Nagaland is also regarded as a land of festivals. Most of these festivals revolve around agriculture. Over 85% of the population of Nagaland is directly dependent on agriculture. The people of Nagaland live mostly in villages that are built high up in the mountains or on slopes overlooking verdant valleys. The Hornbill Festival is the biggest festival hosted in Nagaland and is celebrated every year from 1st to 10th December at the Naga Heritage Village of Kisama near Kohima. The Hornbill Festival was started in 2000 as a major event to promote tourism in the state and to bring all the tribes together under one roof. Now, the festival draws tourists from mainland India and also from around the world. The festival serves as a window into Nagaland, a way to experience the way of life and the traditions of this state. Chapter 10: Pushkar, the colourful fair of Rajasthan. Before we begin, India is a land of a variety of festivals and vibrant fairs. Every festival of India celebrates India's customs and traditions. Likewise, fairs, that is melas, highlight the local culture of the hosting city in colourful and expressive ways. They reflect the folklore and history of the region. This story is an excerpt of a travel account written on Pushkar Fair, the largest fair in the state of Rajasthan. In the long, blue evenings of autumn, when the moon begins to fatten for the brightest night of the year, the tribes start to move. They stream out from all over Rajasthan, heading for the land around Pushkar. There are camel-herding Raikars with turbans like blazing sunsets, wandering Gujjars, their women in gypsy bright skirts swaying like flowers in a breeze, Lohars with their creaking, nail-studded carts, and martial bhils whose ancestors were fearsome warriors. Pushkar has held one of the world's most colourful animal fairs every year for centuries. Cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and horses are bought and sold after much bargaining. It is also an annual gathering of families normally separated by great stretches of the desert. Relatives and friends greet each other, and there is a great deal of fun, food, and shopping. Pushkar excited our senses. The sand felt soft under our feet. The irresistible aroma of frying pakoras and crunchy, succulent golden jalebis emerged from a dhaba. Its owner was a man with the build of a wrestler and the expression of a movie villain. We risked his appearance and told him what we wanted. The jalebis were hot and crunchy, dipping with juicy sweetness. The high-calorie snack filled us with energy. We clicked a tourist perched awkwardly on a camel, looking rather nervous. In front of the camel, a man lay near a sharp pile of long-handled pitchforks called chokni. He had a mobile phone plastered to his ear. Pushkar bridges time and equipment with chokni and mobile phone perfectly matched. We drifted, though the crowd cheered at camel races and turban tying competitions, and thrilled at the roaring tension of the well of death, where powerful bikes spun around at terrifying speeds.
We delighted at children chortling as they tumbled out of an inflatable Mickey Mouse. A man with a warrior moustache sat in a stall selling
swords and shields of various shapes. We visited a tented stable which housed a superb white horse with pink ears. A young Haryanvi farmer said that the beautiful animal was of the Nukra breed and that it had originally been sold for 13 lakhs but was now priced at 51 lakhs. We strolled past women shopping for bangles, while their lone male companion stood behind, frowning unhappily. Camels slurped water from a trough, dipping into their own reflections. It was only when we noticed the lengthening shadows that we realized that we had been here the whole day. The great tented camp on the plain and its twinkling cooking fires were touched by the orange disk of the setting sun. When we wove our way through them, many village folk looked up, smiled, and offered to share their meal with us. Most desert people are very hospitable. We sat cross-legged around a fire on soft sheepskin rugs, ate ember-baked rotla bread with a curry of crisp desert vegetables. We then drank rich white chas made from buttermilk and churned with spices and herbs. The sun, a flaming orange ball, sank slowly into the hot desert sands. The night was silvered with moonlight as we slept. We rose before dawn and merged into a river of people flowing towards the lakes. We were caught in an irresistible current of moving humans for almost an hour. We could not slow down. We could not speed up. We could not move right or left. Then groups began peeling off and pouring into lanes that led down to their favorite bathing ghats. We sat on the flat roof of a lakeside building. Thanks to the elevated platform, we had a panoramic view of the ghats. What an incredible sight! On three sides spread the Jayeshtha Pushkar Lake, metallic in the pre-dawn light. The steps leading down to the lake were crowded with bare-chested men and brightly dressed women. All eyes were fixed on the glowing eastern horizon. Then, as a chip of the sun thrust over the edge, bells began to ring, and men and women plunged into the water and threw flowers into the lake, welcoming the dawn. Soon, a floating carpet of pink rose petals started to spread out from the bathing ghats across the water. That night, while the great glow of the full moon shimmered on the surface, we stood on our terrace and looked out over the lake. Slowly, pilgrims carried their lamps to the water's edge and set them afloat on the lake to the sound of lapping water and the scent of incense rising in fragrant blue clouds. It was a beautiful ceremony of thanks for the year that had passed and hope for the year to come. We knew that when dawn appeared, most of the lamps would have flickered out, and the caravans would be plodding back across the sands. Next autumn, before the huge full moon brightened the sky, the tribes would be back, drawn by the old magic of Pushkar. Poem 5.
The Coromandel Fishers.
Before we begin, the fishermen catch fish for their livelihood. The poem is a call to arms from the fishermen to their friends. They want to start the day because the sun has already risen. The poem beautifully describes how the lives of the fishermen are intertwined with the ocean, and that both their lives and deaths are connected to it. It also highlights the love and reverence the fishermen have for the sea. Let's read the poem and explore it. Rise, brothers, rise! The wakening skies pray to the morning light. The wind lies asleep in the arms of the dawn, like a child that has cried all night. Come, let us gather our nets from the shore and set our catamarans free, to capture the leaping wealth of the tide, for we are the kings of the sea. No longer delay, let us hasten away in the track of the seagull's call. The sea is our mother, the cloud is our brother, the waves are our comrades all. What though we toss at the fall of the sun,
where the hand of the sea god drives?
He who holds the storm by the hair will hide in his breast our lives. Sweet is the shade of the cacao nut glade and the scent of the mango grove, and sweet are the sands at the full o' the moon,
with the sound of the voices we love.
But sweeter, O brothers, the kiss of the spray and the dance of the wild foam's glee. Row, brothers, row to the edge of the verge, where the low sky mates with the sea. Chapter 11. George learns a lesson. Before we begin, what do you do when you commit a mistake unknowingly that causes a certain loss to someone? Do you honestly confess to it or try to blame others for it? When you are honest, you speak the truth and you present yourself in a genuine and sincere way, taking responsibility of your feelings and actions. George Washington was the founding father and the first president of the United States. Read this excerpt from George Washington's biography, in which he displays truthfulness and honesty in his childhood days. What a fine day it was for young George Washington. At just 6 years old, he had his very own hatchet. George was proud of his new hatchet. Its blade was shiny and sharp. George swung the hatchet through the air just to see the sun shine on it. His father stopped him. "A hatchet is not a toy, George," his father warned. "It can do much harm if you are not careful. Always be careful when you use it." George nodded at his father's words and understood the gravity of those words. George promised he would always be very careful with it. One day, George was feeling more excited than serious. His family's farm seemed to be full of things to cut. George started testing the hatchet's sharpness in the field. First, he tested his hatchet on a row of weeds at the edge of the cornfield. It sliced through their thin stems. After that, he took aim at the thicker stalks of the corn plants. Whack! 3 corn stalks fell with a rustle and a crunch. George stepped back, startled. He looked at his hatchet with a new respect. His father was right. He would have to be careful. Not far from the cornfield, George's father maintained his fruit orchard. His father was proud of the sweet apples, peaches, and pears that the trees produced for his family. He kept the trees' branches trimmed and took utmost care of them. Mr. Washington gave extra attention to his youngest tree. It was a delicate cherry tree. The cherry tree had been just a sapling when Mr. Washington planted it. Each year, he watched it grow stronger. Mr. Washington took very good care of his cherry tree. This year, there were blossoms on its branches. Perhaps, he thought, it might even give fruit. Mr. Washington thought of the fresh cherries they could pick. Then he thought of the cherry pies Mr. Washington could bake with the sweet cherries. He smiled to himself as he gave the cherry tree a pat. George ran up to Mr. Washington as he walked back to the house for supper. "This hatchet works well, father," he said. His father smiled. "Yes, I've seen you using it." "Thank you again, father, for such a wonderful gift," said George before running inside to get ready for dinner. During dinner, George's mother advised him to make good use of his hatchet. She asked George to help her chop wood for the fire. George readily agreed. The next morning, George hurried through his breakfast. As soon as he finished his last morsel, he told his mother, "I'm ready to chop wood now." His mother sent him out to the woodshed. Once done, he wanted to chop more wood, but there was none left. So he went outside. Just as he was looking for something to use his hatchet on, he saw the trunk of the young cherry tree. The tree trunk looked just right. It wasn't full grown as the apple and pear tree were. Without thinking twice, George chopped at the cherry tree. The blade dug into the tree trunk but pulled free easily. Why, it would take just a few strokes of his hatchet to cut the tree down. George chopped until the tree fell. George looked proudly at the fallen tree. It was then that he remembered how much his father liked the cherry tree. And he remembered how his father had told him to be careful with the hatchet. George hurried back to the woodshed and sat in a dark corner. Mr. Washington saw the fallen tree onto the house.
He saw that its trunk was cut through with many strokes.
He realized there would be no cherries, no cherry pies. After all his hard work and care, there would be no cherries. George's father sadly walked back to the house. George saw his father walk past the woodshed. Slowly, he followed his father into the house. He held his hatchet tightly. His father turned as he heard George came in the door. He looked at George. He looked at George's hatchet. George could see that his father was very angry. "George," he said, "do you know who cut down my cherry tree?" George took a deep breath. He tried not to think about being punished. Faith is like a stony uphill climb. A single stumble might send you sprawling, but belief and steadfastness will see you to the very top. So, George decided not to break his father's faith in him and told the truth. He said, "I cannot tell a lie, Father. I cut down your cherry tree." George looked at his feet. He felt like crying. "I wasn't careful with the hatchet. I'm sorry, Father." Then he held his breath and waited to hear what his punishment would be. George felt his father's hands on his shoulders. "Look at me, son," said Mr. Washington. George made himself look up at his father. To George's surprise, his father no longer seemed angry. In fact, Mr. Washington looked rather calm. "You have been honest, son," said Mr. Washington. "That means more to me than any cherry tree ever could."